Hello, welcome to Pardon My Vlog, the show where I talk at you and you listen, or pretend to listen, or don't, because that's what you do. Anyway, it's another day, so you know what that means. I'm reading you another story, because no point starting a conversation while Dan's on holiday, kind of. As far as you're aware, he's on holiday. The mysteries of the internet. So, this week I'm reading you from a urban fantasy work that I've kind of abandoned at this point, but I still think is well done enough to show you, just as an example of my writing. I think it's actually pretty good. It's just I kind of got bored of the premise. The idea behind it was I really like urban fantasy novels, but they're all very American. I started writing this before I learned about the Ben Aaronovitch series of British urban fantasy series about a policeman, and there's some similarities. In this instance, the main character is a forensic investigator. One of the tropes I really like in urban fantasy is when magic has returned to the world and people are aware of it. There are a couple of urban fantasy series that do this really well, and I think it's a good story to explore because the hidden fantasy stuff, the hidden magic idea has been done a lot. So I'll read this to you now. I hope you enjoy it. Badger's Story. Prologue. I remember my father saying, "The world's gone to hell," as he read his Sunday paper while I choked down my Rice Krispies before his cigarette smoke turned them to ashes. If only he knew how right he was. Turns out, though, immigrants and taxes weren't the source of our woes, but magic was. A year after his death, magic came back to the world. I was 12 at the time. To say magic came back doesn't quite do justice to the tsunami of change that rocked the world to its core. During the middle of Prime Minister's Question Time, the then Prime Minister began to twist and morph. His skin turned a mottled grey, hair spilling to the chamber floor. Inch-long fangs burst from his lips in a spray of bloody ichor. His back twisted into a hump that bulged to his monstrous spine ridges. He had morphed into a carrion ghoul, right in the middle of Parliament. The ensuing uproar brought Britain to its knees for years to come. Elections, re-elections, and a minor coup by a group of Cambridge Footlight students held the political attentions of the country in sway till a suitable level of bureaucracy was put in place, and everyone could pretend it had always been there. No one knows what happened to that Prime Minister, but it's generally thought he was secluded away on an old country estate with a well-stocked graveyard. Shortly before this in China, roughly 10 minutes before, two great dragons burst forth from the mouths of the Yangtze and Yellow rivers. The great beasts flew all over China, tumbling and fighting, their leonine faces looking upon every part of the country. This took them 28 days to complete. Then they returned to Beijing, landing outside the Zongnanhai, headquarters of the Communist Party, and humbly begged entrance into the party. Now the Yangtze Dragon is the chairman of the Communist Party, and by most accounts, a fair and just leader. On the same day in Australia, 80% of the Aboriginal population fell into a coma. They did not wake from this for 3 months. Then, as a group, they all walked into the outback and disappeared. Till one day a little girl appeared in the Australian Parliament and demanded to speak. Despite her young age, she spoke with an eloquence and confidence of a grown woman, and could not be denied. She spoke of how the Aboriginal peoples had reunited with the Dreamtime, and how they were one once more. She spoke of the shining civilization that would be built by those of the Dream, as she called herself, and how they would brook no interference from outsiders. And then she was gone. Soon, people who went into the outback were found dead on the border. Their bodies unmarked, there was no sign of how they died, even with the most thorough autopsy. At this time, a cult of the Dreamers cropped all over Australia and then spread across the world. All over the world, ancient powers, creatures and traditions spilled forth into the modern age and flourished. Everywhere people's blood ran true, and I was no exception. I am William DeWin, but most folks call me Badger. I'm a blood-born sorcerer, a journeyman, 3rd rank of the necromantic arts, within the Royal Society of Arcane Research and Affairs, registered medium and arcane forensic investigator for East Sussex Police Force. It's a job like any other. Boring paperwork, shitty bosses, dickbag co-workers, sometimes, if I'm really lucky, a night off. Oh, and sometimes I fight monsters, but you don't want to hear about that. Chapter 1. Hello? Badger, you awake? No, I'm asleep. Now fuck off. No can do, compadre. We got work to do. Got a body down Preston Park. Looks like a weird one. Nigel? Yeah? I hate you. Love you too, buddy. Now get down here ASAP, or Her Highness will crucify you. I dressed in things that might have been clothes, and lurched out the door of my flat before my eyes were even open. Anne was on the street making a flailing attempt at a jog before I even realised I was out of bed. The pre-dawn light and chill air made me regret every decision I'd made since conception. It was only a 15-minute flail to Preston Park from my flat, and I made it in what I thought was an admirable 25. The chill jog through the looming grey office buildings and Victorian terraces woke me up nicely. By my phone's somewhat blinding light, I could see it was just shy of 4 in the morning. I'd gotten in late, so this early wake-up call left me with about an hour's sleep, if I was generous. Great. I just knew that today was going to be a long day. I saw the flashing blue lights and picked up speed, and read headlong to what I thought was a tree. It turned out to be a brick shithouse, disguised as a man. As I looked up into his face, which seemed a very long way up, he said in his perfect police officer's tones, "Sorry, sir, the park's closed due to a crime scene. I believe there's a shelter on London Road that might still be open." He thought I was homeless. He even said it with one of those pitying, kindly smiles. I plunged my hand into my hoodie with such force I felt it rip a little, and pulled out my leather bifold, the electrum of my Royal Society insignia sparkling in the flashing blue light, while the prosaic plastic of my police ID shone dully. Holding it up to this mobile mountain to see, I pushed past and ducked under the police tape ringing most of the park. I made my way past the tennis courts to where a squat six-sided summerhouse covered in chicken wire barding stood. Most of the activity seemed to be behind this. Torchlights were swaying back and forth along the ground. The occasional swing would show a silhouetted form on the floor, clawed fist upraised. I heard the rasp on the tarmac behind me and turned to see a pool of white-blue light. My morning caller. Nigel Engel was what you'd classically call an anorak, balding, with thick glasses and a slight stoop. Nigel had an encyclopedic mind for anything arcane, magical, or myth-related, with his specialist subjects being demons and angels. He was the only practicing demonologist in the south of England, and he made the best coffee known to man, which he is offering to me now from a thermos flask. Manna from heaven. We stood in the glow of Nigel's mage light, a small plastic bulb that floated at Nigel's shoulder, producing a circle of blue-white light. "Fine night for it," Nigel quipped. "Who's on Monday tonight?" "Hodges and Clare. They've been there a good half an hour already." "Great, we should be able to see the body by dawn. You started looking yet?" Nigel rocked back and forth on the soles of his shoes. "Maybe, but I can't say for sure. Want to have a look? Better than standing here freezing my ass off." So he wandered back to the tape, with the mage light bobbing along behind us all the way. Nigel pointed to a spot right under the tape. In the faint moonlight, there was a glistening line that ran all along the edge of the park. I squatted down to get a closer look and saw the mountain not far off, carefully watching us. I thought at first it was just spirit marks, but there's too much. I nodded at Nigel's assessment and gently poked through the detritus of the ground. "Have you got a silver mirror on you?" "In the van. Wait here, I'll be right back." I rocked back on my haunches, thinking. "Have you found anything?" I looked up. It was the mountain. He was on the other side of the police tape from me. I hadn't even heard him move. Maybe. It was more of a grunt than a response, but I was still digging in the dirt. Nigel jogged up and handed me a mirror over my shoulder. I took the mirror with my left hand and pulled a good-sized stone from the soil with my right. Angling the mirror to reflect the moonlight onto the stone, I channeled a spark of my power, like releasing an ember from a bonfire, onto the stone. As soon as the spark hit, the stone began to ooze blood, thick, black droplets sliding from a point in the heart of the stone. They slid down my arm and dropped into nothing, The world zeroed in to just me and the stone, the droplets of blood running hot down my arm. I felt the pulse of the place, a great slow booming, stretching out of the land all around me. Slow, far too slow. Then it stopped. Everything was silence. Then the world around me rushed in, and I was flung back with the force of the death. What was hopefully only a few seconds later, I was looking up at the last of the stars. Then Nigel's face swam into view, lessening the beauty of the sight somewhat. He then began dabbing at my nose with the tissue. His mouth was moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. My hearing must not have switched back on yet. He was explaining something to someone at my feet. I tried to move my head to see, but the pain made it abundantly clear that moving was firmly on the list of things I couldn't do right now, right alongside flight and finding a steady girlfriend. Nigel moved off, and slowly but surely my hearing tuned itself back in, just in time to hear a click of high heels as a stiletto tip buried itself in my face. "He'll live, right?" came a voice from above me. "Yes, but he'll need a minute to pull himself together. The shock of something like this isn't something anyone shrugs off," said Nigel's voice. "Well, if he doesn't get up in 5 minutes, drag his useless ass to A&E. Another poke with the shoe. "Yes, boss," I wheezed. The mountain moved into my field of view and held forth his hand. It took me a second to realise what it meant, but eventually I grabbed for his hand and was pulled to my feet. Swiping under my nose with the sleeve of my hoodie, I looked at Detective Chief Inspector Marsha Eslin, a small, though still taller than me, woman who could only be described as dark. Dark eyes, dark hair, dark scowl. Right now she looked like she'd seriously like to kick me again. "What happened here?" "The spirit of the land here just died." "Shit. So we're looking at 2 murders?" "I'd a guess, yes." "Shit. Engel, brew up more of that coffee, it's going to be a long day." I was sitting on a bench 10 minutes later, watching the ME load up the body into the van, when the mountain sat down heavily next to me. We sat in silence for a few moments, watching the commotion of getting the body onto the stretcher. The body was slick with blood, and the ME's assistant, a kid by the name of Powell, kept dropping his hand, so they couldn't slide the body bag under it. The mountain coughed, then cleared his throat. I turned to him. "What?" I mean to say." "What, damn it? What the fuck was that back there?" "Me doing my job, for whatever that's worth." "No, I mean, what was that back there?" I mouthed a silent "oh," and carried on. "Not worked with arcane forensics before, have you?" "No, not exactly." "Told it was better for your career to steer clear of that hoodoo shit?" He didn't say anything, but I could see from the look in his eye he'd been told that, and that's precisely what he'd done. Hell, I was probably the first magically inclined person he'd talked to who wasn't on the other side of an interrogation room. What I did was what's called a spirit delve. What it does is call forth a manifestation of the genius loci, kami, or whatever you want to call them. It's not the most polite way to meet the local spirit, but if they leave spirit marks, it's generally kosher. So the blood from the stone? Whoever lived here was hurt, and that was all he could send. He must have had a sense of humour at least. The mountain kept looking at me till I took the hint. In manifesting the spirit, I was connected to him, so when he died, a bit of my power died too. In this case, a big enough chunk to knock me out. Must have been a big sucker, which isn't good. You keep calling this thing a he. Just a guess. Most spirits of static areas like parks or woods take on male forms, whereas rivers and roads, anything that flows tends to be female. I hear in Iceland all the active volcanoes have a female loci. He sat there for a few minutes taking this all in, then a few more moments putting the pieces together. So, why does it matter if the spirit is killed? Who would care? I yawned luxuriantly and stretched out on the bench, my neck popping loudly. I'm too tired to go over Brighton's paranormal power players right now. The boss will explain the spirit court to everyone in the briefing later, I'm sure. Stealing on my notes, no doubt. I muttered the last under my breath, but I'm sure he heard me. I'm Hawkins, by the way. Sebastian Hawkins. Badger. We shook limply. Then Hawkins wandered off, and I tried to doze without falling asleep. Nigel woke me 20 minutes later. And that was Badger's story. I hope you enjoyed that. See you next week.